July looked like a better month for the Ayr, Prestwick and Troon property market. More homes available, more homes coming to the market, more sales agreed. So on paper, you look at it and say, the market picked up. And it did. But here's the bit that matters if you're thinking about selling. Ayr, Prestwick and Troon are not telling the same story. Ayr gained sales momentum, Prestwick stayed tight for stock, and Troon had the biggest change of the month with far more homes coming to the market. So if you're a homeowner in Ayr, Prestwick or Troon, the question is not just, is the market good? The better question is, what kind of market am I actually selling into? Before we go into each town properly, let's take a step back and compare the three areas side by side. And this is where the July figures become interesting. Prestwick had the highest number of homes available, with Ayr sitting lowest and Troon just behind Prestwick. But when you look at the new instructions, Troon jumps out straight away. Troon had more new properties coming onto the market than Ayr or Prestwick. That is a change worth paying attention to, because last month Troon's story was all about tight supply. July looked different. More choice started to come back into the Troon market. Now compare that with sales agreed. This is where the three areas were surprisingly close. Ayr, Prestwick and Troon are all set fairly tight band for sales agreed. Ayr had 26, Prestwick had 28 and Troon had 29. So even though Troon had more new listings, it did not run away in terms of sales agreed. And that matters, because it suggests Troon became more competitive for sellers during July. More properties came onto the market, but sales agreed only edged ahead of Ayr and Prestwick. Then look at selling time. Ayr was the fastest moving market at 63 days. Prestwick had 71 and Troon was slowest at 77. That does not mean that Troon is weak, but it does tell us that more stock and longer selling times can exist at the same time. So the quick comparison is this. Ayr had the fastest moving market, Prestwick remained steady and tight, Troon had the biggest increase in fresh competition. And that sets up the rest of the update, because each area needs a different interpretation. Let's start with Ayr. Ayr had 50 properties available during July. That was up from 45 in June, but still below 67 available in July last year. So buyers had a little more choice than they did in June, but still far less choice than they did a year ago. New instructions fell slightly. There were 21 new properties coming into the market, compared with 24 in June. But the big improvement for Ayr was sales agreed. Sales agreed increased from 20 in June to 26 in July. That's a strong monthly improvement. It also means Ayr agreed more sales than the number of new properties coming to the market. That's usually a positive sign. It suggests that buyers are absorbing available stock rather than letting it build up. The slight caution is selling time. The average days in the market increased from 54 days in June to 63 days in July. That's still not bad. In fact, that is exactly in line with July last year. But it does remind us that June's quicker selling time was not automatically repeated. So what does it mean if you're selling in Ayr? I would say Ayr looked healthier than July did in June. Buyer activity improved, sales agreed recovered, and stock is still relatively limited compared with last year. But I would not take that as permission to be casual with price or presentation. Buyers are still comparing, they're still looking at condition, they're still looking at home report, and they're still asking themselves, is this the best option for my money? Ayr takeaway is simple. Sales momentum improved, but your property still needs to justify its price. Prestwick is interesting this month because the figures look steady rather than dramatic. And sometimes the steady tells you quite a lot. There were 65 available properties in Prestwick during July. That was slightly down from 67 in June. But the biggest comparison is with July last year, when there were 105 properties available. So Prestwick still has far less stock than it did 12 months ago. That's important for sellers. Less stock usually means less direct competition, but it doesn't automatically mean buyers will rush. There were 29 new instructions in July, down slightly from 31 in June. Sales agreed were also slightly down from 29 in June to 28 in July. So Prestwick was very balanced. Roughly the same number of homes came to the market as went under offer. Average selling time moved from 67 days in June to 71 days in July. That's a little slower month on month, but still much better than July last year, when the average was 89 days. So Prestwick isn't weak, it's just not flying. It's tight for stock, but measured buyer behaviour. For a Prestwick seller, I would take encouragement from a limited stock position, but I would also be realistic. Buyers in Prestwick are not buying anything at any price just because there are fewer homes available. They're comparing location, garden space, parking, school catchments, condition, home report findings, and how much work they need to do after moving in. Prestwick's takeaway is this: low stock helps sellers, but buyers still expect value. Troon is the section I would pay the closest attention to this month. Not because the market is weak, but because it changed the most. In June, Troon had only 44 properties available. In July, that increased to 58, and that's a noticeable jump. The bigger movement was new instructions. Troon had 19 new instructions in June. In July, that doubled to 38. I reran the figures and they look consistent, but it also does not appear to be caused by new build stock. So this looks like a genuine increase in resale properties coming to the KA10 market. That matters because last month Troon's story was all about scarcity, low stock, more sales agreed than new listings, a market where buyer's choice was tightening. July changed that slightly. Sales agreed did increase from 27 to 29, so buyers were still active. The new instructions jumped much more sharply. 38 new homes came to the market while 29 sales were agreed. That means that supply increased faster than demand. Again, it doesn't mean that Troon is suddenly oversupplied. It still had fewer properties available in July last year, but it does mean sellers have more competition than they did a month ago. Troon's average selling time stayed at 77 days. That was the slowest of the three areas. The Troon is not always a direct comparable with Ayr and Prestwick. It can include more coastal homes, larger houses, premium flats, retirement properties, and specialist stock. Those properties can take longer to match with the right buyer. But if you're selling in Troon, I would not ignore this. More homes coming onto the market means buyers have more options. When buyers have more options, price, presentation, and location matter more. The Troon takeaway is this: scarcity helped sellers in June, but July brought more competition back to the market. So which market was strongest in July? It depends what you mean by strongest. If we're talking about sales momentum, Ayr's probably takes it. Sales agreed increased from 20 to 26 and sales outpaced new instructions. If we're talking about tight stock compared with last year, Prestwick stands out. Stock was still almost 40% below July 2025. If we're talking about biggest change, Troon is the one to watch. New instructions doubled from June, and that changes the environment for sellers. So I would not say that one market is clearly beating the others. I would describe them like this: Ayr improved, Prestwick remained tight, Troon became more competitive. That's a useful comparison because each one leads to different advice. In Ayr, I would be looking to take advantage of improved buyer activity. In Prestwick, I would use the low stock position, but still price carefully. In Troon, I would be very aware of what else is coming to the market. This mistake would be assuming that because Ayr, Prestwick and Troon sit close together, they all behave the same way. They do not. And your selling strategy should reflect that. This month's seller's vision is about choice. When buyers have very little choice, sellers can sometimes get away with slightly more. They're not always, but a lack of competition can help. When more properties come to the market, that changes. Buyers start comparing more directly. They can look at one property and say, that one has a better garden, that one needs less work, that one has a cleaner home report, that one is closer to the town centre, that one is better value. That is why launch matters. And don't just mean getting photos online. A proper launch means understanding who the buyer is, what else they can buy, what might put them off, and what will make them act. It means pricing the property in a way that creates interest rather than resistance. It means presenting the home properly before photographs are taken. It means thinking about the wording, the viewing process, and the follow-up. In July, Troon is the clearest example. New listings increase sharply. That gives buyers more choice, and more choice means sellers need to compete more deliberately. Sellers' vision takeaway is this: the market can create opportunity, but the launch has to win the buyer. For landlords, Ayr, Prestwick and Troon remain interesting areas. there is demand for standard rental property. There is also potential for short stay demand in the right locations. We have tourism, golf, coastal travel, events, visiting family, contractor demand. So it is understandable that some owners look at serviced accommodation and wonder whether it would outperform a standard tenancy. But the comparison has to be done properly. You cannot compare a nightly rate on a holiday letting website with a monthly rent and assume that that tells the full story. There is the wrong comparison. The real question is, what is the realistic annual profit after occupancy, cleaning, utilities, platform fees, management, maintenance, furnishing, licensing, and your additional workload? For some properties, serviced accommodation may make sense. For others, a standard let may offer a better balance of income, predictability, and management. This is particularly important for owners who are not local or do not want regular involvement. A standard tenancy is generally more predictable. Serviced accommodation may produce higher gross income, but it usually requires more active management and carries more variation across the year. Landlord takeaway is this: do not choose the highest looking number. Choose the route that gives the best realistic return for that property. Mortgage update this month is fairly simple. Do not rely on old numbers. That applies for buyers and sellers. For buyers, an agreement in principle from a few months ago may not reflect what you can borrow today. Rates can change, products can change, your circumstances can change, and lender affordability calculations can change. So before offering, speak to a broker and understand the monthly payment at the price you're considering, not just the maximum borrowing figure. The actual monthly payment, that is what decides whether a move is comfortable. For sellers, this matters when you're assessing offers. The highest offer is not always the strongest offer. A buyer with recent mortgage advice, a clear deposit, position and no messy chain can be stronger than a slightly higher offer from someone who's not checked up their position properly. So when an offer comes in, the question is not only how much, it is also how secure is it. Mortgage readiness affects how likely the sale is to complete. A mortgage takeaway is this: in the current market, a prepared buyer is worth paying attention to. Looking ahead, I'll be watching these three things. First, Ayr. Can sales agreed stay ahead of new instructions? If that continues, Ayr could remain a fairly healthy position for sellers. Second, Prestwick. Does the low stock position continue? Prestwick still has fewer homes available than last year, but buyers are not acting with panic. So I'll be watching whether sales agreed hold steady. Third, Troon. This is probably the big one for August. Was July's jump in new listings a 1 month spike, or the start of more choice returning to the Troon market? That will matter. Because if more homes continue to come on, sellers may need to be more competitive. Overall, I would describe the market as active, but selective. There are buyers, there are sales being agreed, but buyers are still comparing carefully. The homes most likely to perform well are the ones that launch properly from day one. Right price, good presentation, strong photographs, clear marketing, easy viewing access, and a realistic follow-up. If you're wondering where your own property sits in today's market, feel free to get in touch. Every house, every flat, every situation is different, and the Rightmove numbers only tell part of the story. I'm Brian from Be Listed. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next update.